The corner of her bedroom looked ordinary, just faded paint and shadows. But when 11-year-old Anna pressed her palm against the wall, the plaster groaned and a hidden door cracked open. What waited inside wasn't a secret passage. It was something no child should ever be forced to see. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Anna Mitchell, 11, loved sketching and exploring. Her father, Daniel, 38, worked long nights to keep their small-town home steady. Neither expected what their house had been hiding. At first, it was only an ordinary summer afternoon. The kind where heat shimmered off the roof shingles, cicadas hummed lazily in the trees, and the smell of cut grass drifted through the open windows. For 11-year-old Anna Mitchell, afternoons like this meant sketching in her worn notebook while her father, Daniel, worked at the kitchen table sorting bills with a pencil tucked behind his ear. The Mitchells lived in an old farmhouse at the edge of town, weather-beaten but still upright, its beams holding the weight of years. Daniel had taken pride in buying it cheap, telling neighbors he'd fix it up piece by piece. But fixing always seemed to come second to the long shifts he worked at the mill, or the extra jobs he picked up just to keep them steady. The house had quirks, squeaky stairs, drafty windows, doors that leaned a little crooked in their frames, but Daniel shrugged them off with the stubbornness of a man who believed old things could last if you just kept patching. Anna didn't mind the quirks either, not at first. She liked how the floors whispered when she walked barefoot, or how the porch creaked when she swung her legs from the railing. She liked the attic, especially, filled with forgotten trunks and dust that turned silver in the sunlight. Her sketches filled with crooked beams, tilted windows, and shadows falling across chipped paint. To her, it was a house with personality. That afternoon she was sitting cross-legged in the living room, pencil smudges on her fingers, when her eyes caught something odd. Against the far wall, just below the edge of the wallpaper, ran a narrow seam. Not a crack from settling, but a straight, thin line, almost like a door frame. She frowned, tilted her head, and crawled closer, tracing her small fingers along the edge. The wall felt cooler here, smoother. "Dad," she called, "come look at this." Daniel didn't look up right away. He was hunched over a stack of overdue bills, shoulders tight with the weight he never talked about in front of her. Finally, he set the pencil down and pushed himself up with a sigh, his boots dragging across the floor. "What is it now?" he asked, though his voice was gentle. Anna tapped the seam with her finger. "It looks like a line. Like this wall isn't really a wall." Daniel squatted beside her, squinting. For a moment, his jaw tightened. Then he smoothed his face into something lighter. He rapped his knuckles against the plaster. A hollow echo answered back. "Just old bones of the house," he said, forcing a chuckle. "These old walls like to gripe when the weather turns. Next thing, they'll be asking for soup." Anna giggled at the joke, but her eyes stayed on the seam. "It doesn't look normal," she whispered. Daniel ruffled her hair. A gesture meant more to end the conversation than to soothe. "Everything in this place talks floorboards, pipes, even the roof when it's tired. You'll get used to it." He stood and went back to the kitchen table, shoving the bills into a neat pile as if arranging paper could also arrange his nerves. Anna stayed kneeling by the wall. She pressed her ear against it, listening. For a moment, there was nothing, just the faint hum of cicadas outside and the low churn of the old refrigerator. Then, almost imagined, a faint chill seemed to seep through the plaster. She shivered and pulled back. "Come on, kiddo," Daniel called. "Wash your hands. We'll eat soon." The moment passed. Anna obeyed, slipping her notebook under her arm as she went to the sink. They ate quietly, the only sounds the clink of forks and Daniel's occasional cough. Afterward, he busied himself with dishes while Anna curled on the sofa, sketching again. Her pencil traced the faint seam line over and over, each pass darker, until it cut through the page like a scar. As dusk settled, moths battered the screen door, and the air cooled enough that Daniel shut the windows. The house groaned as it always did when night arrived, timbers flexing, pipes ticking, wind rustling through unseen cracks. Daniel settled into his chair with an old newspaper, and Anna fell asleep where she sat, her notebook slipping from her lap. But the house was not finished with them. In the dark hours, Anna stirred awake, the room filled with the scent of dust and something colder. She padded barefoot across the creaking floorboards, her nightdress brushing her knees, and stood before the seam again. The moonlight through the window slanted across it, making the lines stand out like a shadow drawn into the plaster. She reached out, her fingertips trembling, and pressed lightly. For a heartbeat, Nothing happened. Then, as if the wall itself exhaled, a faint stream of dust poured down, soft and gray, settling across her hand. Anna gasped and stumbled back, wiping her palm against her dress. But the grit clung stubbornly. She clutched at her chest, her breath tightening, as though the wall had stolen it straight from her lungs. Behind her, the rest of the house was silent, too silent. Anna stood frozen in the moonlight, staring at the wall, her dress streaked with gray. But soon, the house's quiet refused to stay harmless. The next morning, sunlight bled across the farmhouse floor, pale and thin after a night of restless sleep. Daniel stood at the counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee, the steam curling like a veil in front of his tired face. Anna sat at the table, her sketchbook open, the page filled not with flowers or attic trunks, but with the narrow seam she had traced over and over the night before. "You're up early," Daniel said, stirring sugar into his cup. His voice carried the faint rasp of exhaustion. "I dreamed about it," Anna admitted, her pencil pressed too hard, leaving grooves in the paper. The line on the wall, it was bigger. Daniel glanced over, then looked away quickly, the muscles around his jaw twitching. He forced a chuckle, light and careless. "Dreams'll do that. Next you'll tell me the wall grew arms and started walking." He leaned against the counter, trying to look relaxed. Anna's eyes flicked to him, sharp in a way that didn't match her age. "You heard it too, didn't you? The wall. Breathing?" He stiffened, gripping his mug a little too tightly. Then, with a shrug that felt rehearsed, he said, "It's just beams settling, nothing more. This house makes more grumbles than me before coffee." He raised his cup in mock toast and sipped. The humor was there, but Anna noticed how his knuckles whitened around the handle. She didn't laugh this time. After breakfast, Daniel tried to change the mood. He sent Anna outside to gather eggs from the coop while he fixed the back screen door. The chickens clucked and pecked, their noise grounding, ordinary. But even out here, Anna's gaze kept sliding back toward the house, to the window of her room. From the yard, the wall looked no different, sunlight reflected off the glass. Curtains hung still, but she felt its presence, like it was watching her. When she returned inside with the basket, the air felt heavier, cooler, though Daniel had not yet turned on the fan. He was hammering at the doorframe, each strike echoing too loud in the hallway. "Dad," Anna whispered, setting the eggs down. "Come listen." He frowned, sweat streaking his temple. "What now?" She pointed toward the seam. The wallpaper around it had begun to buckle faintly, edges curling like paper touched by damp. She reached out her hand, hesitated, then pressed. This time the wall answered not with dust, but with a hollow shudder that trembled through the plaster like something shifting just out of sight. Daniel froze mid-swing. The hammer hovered above the nail. For 1 second his face went pale. Then he lowered the hammer, forcing another chuckle. "Old timber, kiddo, that's all. Houses creak, pipes knock, beams shift. You've got to stop letting it spook you." Anna's lips pressed tight. "Pipes don't leave lines in walls." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he returned to the screen door, driving the hammer in with more force than necessary. Each strike rang sharp, like he was punishing the wood. By midday, he insisted on chores, anything to keep her away from that wall. They folded laundry, swept floors, pulled weeds in the small garden. The ordinary rhythms of the day should have settled Anna, but each time she passed through the living room, her eyes caught that seam again. It no longer looked like wallpaper at all. It looked like something waiting to open. That evening the air turned damp, heavy clouds rolling in from the horizon. Thunder muttered faintly in the distance. Daniel cooked a simple supper of fried potatoes and beans, whistling tunelessly, though his eyes strayed often to the wall as he moved around the kitchen. They ate with the window cracked, letting in the smell of rain. Anna's notebook lay beside her plate, the seam drawn darker now, the line jagged. Daniel tried to ignore it, tried to talk about the weather, about school starting soon, but Anna interrupted. "Why don't you ever want to look at it?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He laughed, too loud, setting his fork down with a clatter. "Because it's nothing, that's why. You're chasing shadows." He leaned back in his chair, lifting his mug again. Anna didn't reply. She watched him closely. His laugh had come too quick. His hand still trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. That night, as thunder cracked louder, Anna curled under her blanket, but couldn't sleep. The storm outside made the house complain, shutters rattling, rain hammering the roof, but beneath it all she felt something else. A steady hush, like breath drawn deep inside the walls. She slipped out of bed, padding to the living room in her socks. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the seam in stark white before plunging it back into darkness. She reached out, fingertips brushing the cool plaster. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She spun, heart hammering. Daniel stood in the doorway, his silhouette lit by another flash of lightning. He looked older in that brief glare, weary, as if the house itself had worn him down. "Go back to bed," he said softly. Anna swallowed hard. "It's not just me. You feel it too." He forced a smile, shaking his head. "You're letting your imagination run. Houses talk, that's all. Now sleep." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. In the flicker of the next lightning flash, she saw it, his hand gripping the doorframe, trembling just enough to rattle the wood. Anna stared at his shaking hand, realizing that her father's voice might deny the wall, but his body already knew the truth. Denial no longer explained what they were living with. Denial no longer explained what they were living with. By the third day, the house no longer felt like the same old farmhouse Daniel had fought so hard to buy. The summer air pressed hot and thick outside, but inside, a strange chill lingered along the living room wall where the seam ran. Anna had begun to avoid sitting too close, though her eyes kept drifting toward it. Daniel tried to drown the tension in work. He oiled hinges, tightened screws, patched leaks no one had noticed before. The house had always needed fixing, but now it was as if he was repairing everything except the one thing that truly demanded his attention. That morning, he brought in his toolbox, muttering that he'd settle it once and for all. Anna followed him like a shadow as he knelt in front of the seam. He pressed his ear against the plaster, tapped it with the handle of a screwdriver, then finally swung his hammer against it. The sound that came back was wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of wood or plaster, it was a hollow metallic clang, sharp and echoing, like striking a buried pipe. Both of them froze. Daniel pulled back quickly, trying to mask his unease. He wiped his palms on his jeans and forced a shrug. "Could be old sheet metal bracing inside," he muttered. But Anna saw how he avoided looking at her. She whispered, "It doesn't sound like a wall." "Enough," Daniel said, his voice sharper than he intended. He slammed the hammer back into the toolbox and stood. "There's nothing here. Stop poking at it." That afternoon, Anna escaped to the porch swing, sketchbook balanced on her knees. The air smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass, but even outside, the unease clung. Across the yard, Mrs. Green shuffled by, her shopping bag swinging at her side. The old neighbor had lived on this road longer than anyone. She paused at the fence, peering toward the house with narrowed eyes. "You folks settling in?" she asked. Daniel, who had stepped out to smoke, nodded tightly. "House has its quirks, that's all." Mrs. Green's lips pressed thin. She leaned closer to the fence, lowering her voice. "That house never lets families settle in. It wears them thin. Always some trouble. Always something." Daniel gave a stiff laugh, waving her off. "Stories, that's all." But Anna, sitting on the swing, caught the tremor in Mrs. Green's words. She watched as the woman shook her head and moved on, muttering to herself. By evening, the house's air had shifted again. Anna felt it most when she stood in the hall like the walls themselves carried a faint vibration, not enough to hear but enough to feel in her bones. She pressed her palm flat against the seam. The surface was colder than the rest of the wall, a chill that sank straight into her skin. "Dinner," Daniel called from the kitchen. His voice cracked in a way that told her he felt it too. They ate in near silence. Each scrape of fork against plate seemed magnified, every creak of chair legs too loud. Afterward, Daniel insisted on busy work, Anna wiping counters while he fetched a bucket to mop the floor. He filled it at the sink, the water sloshing warm and clear. He carried it to the living room, muttering about dust. But when he set the bucket down beside the seam, something happened neither of them expected. The water began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as if the bucket tilted though it hadn't. The surface sloshed toward the seam, rippling as though pulled by a current. Anna gasped as the waterline dipped lower. Daniel bent down, eyes wide. A thin stream slid over the rim of the bucket and seeped across the floor toward the seam, vanishing into the narrow line. Within seconds, the bucket was empty, the wood floor beneath it bone dry. Anna's throat tightened. "It drank it," she whispered. Daniel swore under his breath, staggering back. He stared at the bucket, then at the wall, searching for an explanation. But there was none, and then the smell rose. Sharp, chemical, almost metallic, like rust mixed with something sour. It clung in their noses, stinging their eyes. Anna covered her mouth. coughing. Daniel dragged her back, pulling her away from the wall. He dropped the bucket, the clatter echoing through the silent house. The floor lay clean and dry, the bucket empty, the seam untouched, but the acrid chemical smell hung heavy in the room, as if the wall itself had exhaled. That morning, the wall gave up its first secret. That morning, the wall gave up its first secret. Daniel woke with a start, as though the night had never really let him rest. His shirt still clung damp to his back, the imprint of the chair where he had dozed at the doorway etched into his skin. He rubbed his eyes, staring across the living room at the seam, and felt the anger rise again. It wasn't just a crack in plaster anymore. It was a challenge. He fetched his toolbox without a word, his jaw set. Anna followed close, clutching her notebook, her hair tangled from sleep. She sensed the shift in him, less denial now, more defiance. "Stand back," he muttered, setting the crowbar against the edge of the seam. "Dad," I said, "stand back." His voice was rough, not with anger at her, but at something he couldn't name. The metal bit into the plaster. With each push, flakes of paint and strips of old wallpaper broke loose, curling and falling to the floor. Dust swirled in the air, stinging their throats. The wall groaned, faint but unmistakable, like wood being pried apart after years in silence. Anna's heart raced. She wanted to stop him, but she also wanted to see. The crowbar sank deeper. Daniel braced his boot against the wall and heaved. With a crack that echoed through the room, the plaster gave way, splintering like bone. A panel shifted open. Behind it was darkness. A narrow cavity no wider than a closet, lined with wood darkened by age and damp. Daniel leaned forward, flashlight in hand. The beam caught something on the floorboards. At first it looked like a crumpled rag, but when he bent closer, the shape became clear. A shoe. Small, scuffed leather, dust clinging to every seam. Anna clapped a hand over her mouth. Daniel's breath caught. He dropped the crowbar, snatched the panel, and shoved it back into place so hard that splinters flew. A jagged shard sliced into his palm, blood welling as he cursed and staggered back. "Don't look," he hissed, clutching his hand. But Anna had already seen. The shoe was not empty. Its leather tongue curled back just enough to reveal the faint outline of something stuffed deep inside cloth, maybe. Or something worse. And on the wood, just above it, carved into the grain with uneven strokes, were 3 faint letters. M.G. Anna froze, her breath quick and shallow. She felt a pull inside her chest, the way curiosity and terror twisted together until she couldn't tell which one was stronger. Half of her wanted to run upstairs, slam her bedroom door, and never look again. The other half wanted to pry that panel open wider, shine the light deeper, and read the truth the house refused to hide. "Dad," she whispered, "someone left it here." Daniel pressed a rag from his toolbox against his bleeding palm, shaking his head fiercely. "It's nothing. An old shoe. Forgotten. Houses swallow things. Shoes don't carve initials into wood." His face paled. For a heartbeat, his eyes betrayed something raw. Recognition. He looked as if the letters meant more to him than he could admit. Then he tore his gaze away, pushing the toolbox shut with his boot. "This never happened," he said, voice low, final. Anna hugged her notebook to her chest, her knuckles white. The silence between them was louder than the storm outside, louder than the dripping faucet in the kitchen. The wall stood unchanged, its seam sealed again, but the secret behind it pressed close, waiting. Anna lay awake that night. The image of the shoe and the carved initials burned into her mind, knowing her father's fear was no longer denial but recognition. Would you call for help if you saw the ground breathing? But the discovery refused to stay buried. That night, the house seemed to shift with every breath they took. The day's heat had broken with rain, but instead of relief, the air inside turned clammy, sticking to their skin. Shadows leaned longer across the floor, shaped by the weak glow of a single lamp. Daniel sat in his chair near the door to the living room, a rag wrapped around his cut palm. He had cleaned the wound, taped it clumsily, but the sight of blood still smeared into the grain of the wood made Anna's stomach tighten. Neither of them spoke about the shoe. Neither mentioned the carved letters, but silence did not erase the image from Anna's mind. She could still see the dust clinging to leather, the uneven strokes gouged into the wood. She sat cross-legged on the sofa, her sketchbook open across her knees. Her pencil moved without thought, dragging dark lines into the page. The seam, the shoe, the letters. Her hand trembled, smudging graphite until the page looked like it had been rubbed with ash. Daniel noticed. He rubbed a hand across his jaw and muttered, "Stop drawing that thing." She didn't answer. "Anna," his voice sharper now. "Enough." Her pencil froze. She closed the notebook, pressing her palm against the cover as if protecting something fragile. The clock ticked past midnight. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then stopped, leaving the night thick with silence. Daniel rose, checked each window lock, each door, then returned to his chair by the living room wall. Anna lay curled on the sofa, blanket pulled up to her chin, but her eyes stayed open. Every groan of the house felt sharper now, deliberate. Somewhere in the beams above, wood popped like knuckles cracking. A cold draft crawled across the floor, brushing her ankle. She flinched, tucking her feet under the blanket. "Dad?" she whispered. "I'm here," he answered. She lifted her head. He was sitting stiff in the chair, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the seam. His injured hand rested on the armrest, his good hand gripping the crowbar. "Go to sleep," he said. Anna tried. She shut her eyes, but the images kept coming. The shoe, the letters, and then her mother's face, blurred by memory, her mother who had left when Anna was still little, whose name was never spoken in this house. For a fleeting second, Anna wondered if her father had thought of her too when he saw those carved initials. A sound broke the quiet, not the ordinary rattle of pipes or sigh of timber. This was different, a low, muffled thump, like a fist knocking faintly from the other side of the wall. Anna shot upright. "Dad, I heard it." His voice was tight, jaw locked. The sound came again. A dull, rhythmic thud, not loud but impossible to mistake. Daniel stood, moved to the seam, and pressed his hand flat against it. His shoulders stiffened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, with sudden violence, he slammed his palm hard against the wall. "Not tonight, not again," he hissed. The sound stopped. Anna's breath came fast, sharp. Her small hands clutched the notebook against her chest, fingers digging into the cardboard. She couldn't blink, couldn't look away from her father. He dragged the chair forward until it blocked the seam, then sat back down, crowbar across his lap. His eyes didn't leave the wall. The hours dragged. Anna drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, each doze cut short by creaks, by the scrape of her father's chair as he shifted, by the hollow silence pressing in from the wall. Once, she woke to see him still upright, still staring, his hand gripping the crowbar so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Once, she heard him whisper something under his breath. Too low to catch, but she thought it sounded like a name she had heard only in her dreams. Her mother's. Just before dawn, the light in the room flickered. The bulb over their heads buzzed faintly, dimmed, then steadied again. Daniel's head snapped toward it, his eyes wild for a moment before he forced them shut and rubbed his face. "Go back to sleep," he said hoarsely. Anna didn't answer. Her pencil moved again shaky, scratching the words across her notebook. MG. In the stillness before sunrise, the wall gave one final, faint shudder, just enough to rattle the picture frame above it, so gentle it almost seemed like a sigh. By morning, he was no longer the only one who noticed. The storm had cleared, leaving the air washed clean, the roads glittering with puddles. The Mitchell farmhouse, though, carried a heaviness that didn't lift. Daniel moved through the rooms with sunken eyes, exhaustion pressed into every step. Anna sat on the porch steps, her notebook balanced on her knees, sketching the crooked outline of their house. Down the street, children rode bicycles through the puddles, their laughter carrying in the damp air. Yet, when they reached the stretch near the Mitchell property, their voices lowered. They slowed, pedaled past with sidelong glances, then picked up speed again once they were safely away. Anna noticed. She closed her notebook, watching them disappear. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Green arrived with a jar of preserves balanced in her wrinkled hands. She often brought things jams, pies, or just gossip wrapped in kindness. Daniel opened the door, trying to summon a smile. "You look worn thin, Daniel," she said gently. "This house keeping you busy?" He shrugged. "It's old. Always something to patch." Her gaze lingered past him, to the living room where the seam hid beneath the wallpaper. Her lips pressed together, hesitation flickering across her face. Then she lowered her voice. "I shouldn't even say this, but that place doesn't keep people. It wears them out. Your wife left. Now you're fading too." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're fine," he said quickly, the words snapping sharper than he meant. Mrs. Green glanced toward Anna, who stood listening at the edge of the porch. Just don't ignore it. Houses remember more than they ought to. Daniel muttered a thanks, closed the door more firmly than politeness demanded, and stood with his back against it, shoulders rigid. Anna whispered, "She knows." "She knows nothing," he snapped, then softened when he saw her flinch. "Don't listen to gossip. People talk because they've got nothing better to do." But his voice lacked conviction. That evening, more whispers drifted in. While Anna fed the chickens, she overheard two boys leaning against the fence, voices hushed but eager. "They say a kid disappeared there years ago," one said. "My brother swears the walls flicker at night," the other added, grinning nervously. Anna felt the hair rise on her arms. She clutched the feed bucket tighter, eyes darting back to the dark window of her room. The boys noticed her watching. One called, "Hey, is it true? You hear it walking?" The other elbowed him, laughing, but their laughter rang hollow. They ran off before she could answer. When Anna went back inside, Daniel was sitting at the table with his head in his hands. He didn't look up as she entered. Night returned heavy and close. The cicadas had gone quiet, leaving the fields around them strangely still. Daniel bolted the door, double-checking each latch, while Anna lingered near the living room. Her eyes kept pulling toward the seam. In the moonlight, the wallpaper seemed to ripple faintly, as though touched by a breeze. She swallowed hard. Outside, footsteps shuffled in the gravel drive. Daniel stiffened, reaching for the crowbar he'd left by the chair. Anna crept to the window, pressing her forehead against the glass. A boy stood at the edge of the yard, no older than 12, a flashlight trembling in his hand. His friends waited further back, shadows flickering. "Dare you?" one whispered. The boy lifted his flashlight, aiming it at the side of the house. For a moment, the beam wavered across the clapboard siding. Then it caught the window of the living room. Anna's breath snagged. In the reflection, she swore she saw something move, just a quick glint, like metal catching the light, shifting inside the seam. The boy dropped his flashlight with a yelp. His friends bolted, leaving him scrambling after them, shoes slapping wet pavement. Daniel pulled Anna away from the window, his grip firm on her shoulder. His face was pale, his jaw set. "Stay away from that wall," he said, voice raw. The porch light flickered once, then died, leaving the seam in shadow. Anna could still see it in her mind, that fleeting glint of something metallic shifting where no light should have been. The secret was no longer his alone. The secret was no longer his alone. By the end of the week, the Mitchell farmhouse was no longer just another house at the edge of town. People slowed their cars when they drove past. Children lingered in the field, daring each other to creep closer before bolting away with nervous laughter. The hum of gossip spread through the diner, the hardware store, even the church pews on Sunday. Anna felt it most at school. Classmates stared at her with wide eyes, some whispering behind their hands. One boy leaned too close at recess and asked if her walls really ate water. She didn't answer. She only clutched her notebook tighter, as if the sketches could defend her. Daniel noticed, too. When he went into town for supplies, conversations hushed as he entered. He felt their eyes, heard their mutters. The whispers weren't just about the house anymore. They were about him, about how he looked more hollow, how he worked less, how his wife had left long ago, and maybe the house would take his daughter too. One humid afternoon, Daniel stepped onto the porch to smoke. The air carried that strange metallic tang again, faint but undeniable, even outdoors. He tried to ignore it, lighting his cigarette with a hand that trembled despite his effort to steady it. A shadow crossed the yard. Sheriff Carter approached, his hat low against the sundae, his boots crunched on gravel, his posture deliberate. Daniel stiffened. "Afternoon, Sheriff." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Daniel. Mind if I step in?" Daniel hesitated. Anna had come to the door, peeking from behind his arm. He didn't want her here for this, but refusing would look worse. He stepped aside. Inside, the sheriff's gaze swept the living room, pausing just long enough on the seam in the wall to make Daniel's stomach twist. "Old place," Carter said. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. "Plenty of old places around here," Daniel replied. The sheriff moved closer, resting a hand briefly on the wallpaper. His fingers lingered as though he felt something there. When he pulled back, he wiped his palm against his trousers. Quick, almost reflexive. "Folks are talking," he said evenly. "Saying your walls groan at night. Saying children are spooked. Folks talk when they're bored." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then leaned closer, lowering his voice so Anna couldn't hear. "Whatever's in that wall, Daniel. Don't go digging. You won't like what you find." Daniel's jaw clenched. "And if I already have?" For the first time, Carter's composure faltered. His eyes flicked to the bandage on Daniel's palm, then to Anna, who still clutched her notebook at the doorway. He straightened his hat and forced a smile. "You patch that wall. Paint it over. Let it stay shut." That evening, the house seemed to thrum with unease. The smell grew sharper, metallic, laced with sour rot, until Daniel cracked the windows, though the air outside was stifling. Anna sat at the table, staring at her father. "He's scared," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, pacing. "Number he's playing at being cautious. You saw him wipe his hand. He felt it too." Daniel stopped pacing, turned on her. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice ragged. "Enough. You don't repeat a word," he said. "You don't tell anyone what we've seen. Do you understand?" Anna's throat tightened. She nodded, but her pencil moved across her notebook anyway, sketching the sheriff's hand pressed against the wallpaper. Night came, thick and heavy. The cicadas were loud, too loud, their drone drowning the silence inside. Daniel lit only one lamp, keeping the others off as if darkness could protect them. Anna couldn't shake the sheriff's words. "Don't go digging, let it stay shut." She lay awake in her bed, watching the ceiling shadows shift. From below, she heard the floor creak as her father moved restlessly through the living room. Then faint but clear a sound came, not a knock, not a sigh. A slow scrape, like metal dragged gently against wood, coming from inside the seam. Daniel froze in the living room doorway, the crowbar loose in his hand, listening as the unseen metal shifted again within the wall. Now the law stood at his fence line. By the next afternoon, the rumor had grown too large to ignore. A patrol car idled in front of the Mitchell farmhouse, its engine a steady hum that carried across the yard. Neighbors gathered in loose clusters along the road, whispering behind their hands, their faces half curious, half afraid. Sheriff Carter stepped out first, his hat pulled low, his posture calm as ever. Behind him came Deputy Owens, younger, broad-shouldered, carrying a black handheld scanner the locals hadn't seen before. Its blinking green light made Anna's stomach twist. Daniel stood stiff on the porch, arms crossed, jaw locked. "You've brought an audience," he muttered. "Not my doing," Carter replied, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Folks talk. Figured I'd ease their minds." Anna gripped her father's sleeve. She could feel the tension running through him like wire pulled too tight. Inside, the living room felt suddenly smaller, crowded with uniforms and tools. The deputy set the scanner on the floor, its screen glowing faintly. A pulse of sound rippled through the room, an invisible wave that made Anna's ears buzz. Daniel stood back, arms folded, watching. "This isn't necessary," he said flatly. "Just routine," Carter said. His tone was almost casual, but his eyes never left the wall. Anna stayed close to her father, her notebook pressed tight to her chest, pages filled with sketches she didn't want anyone else to see. The scanner beeped, then displayed a rough grid. At first, it showed what Anna expected: timbers, joists, the crawl space under the floor. Then the image blurred, lines faltering, the signal straining. "Too much interference," Owens muttered, adjusting dials. "Try again," Carter said quietly. The deputy swept the scanner closer to the seam. The device buzzed louder, its screen flickering. A hollow void appeared, darker than the spaces around it. At first it looked like a gap in the data, a glitch. Then the outline widened. Anna's breath caught. It wasn't just the wall. The void stretched below the floor, sinking deep, far beyond the basement. Owens frowned. "It keeps going. I can't see the bottom." Daniel took a step forward, his voice rough. "What the hell is under my house?" The deputy shook his head. "Never seen readings like this." Carter cut him a sharp look. "Wrap it up." Owens hesitated. "Sheriff," I said, "wrap it up." Carter's voice snapped, sharp enough to silence him. He turned back to Daniel, forcing his tone lighter. "It's old ground, tunnels from before the war maybe, nothing to lose sleep over." But Anna noticed the way his hand tightened on the brim of his hat, the way his jaw worked as if he were holding back words. The scanner powered down, its glow fading. Owens packed it away reluctantly. The sheriff lingered one more moment, his eyes on the seam. Then he tipped his hat and stepped outside. The neighbors swarmed, calling questions. "Is it safe? What did you find? Is it true about the water?" Carter lifted a hand, voice calm. "Just settling beams, nothing dangerous. Folks can go on home. Relief rippled through the crowd. But it wasn't real relief, it was the brittle kind, the kind people pretend with because they're too afraid to dig deeper. They left in twos and threes, whispering still. Back inside, Daniel slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. He lied, he muttered. Anna opened her notebook, flipping to a clean page. With slow, careful strokes, she drew the scanner screen as she remembered it, the widening void, stretching downward. Too deep, she whispered. That night, Anna dreamed of falling endlessly into that hollow, the darkness stretching wider with each heartbeat, and woke to find her father sitting at the window, staring toward the wall as if waiting for it to open. Do you think this is natural, or something far darker? What the experts saw made their faces turn pale. What the experts saw made their faces turn pale. The following morning, trucks arrived, 2 county vehicles, an unmarked van, and a pair of men in plain suits who didn't introduce themselves. Neighbors gathered again at the fence line, their whispers carrying like insects buzzing. Reporters had begun circling too, camera flashes catching the farmhouse at odd angles. Daniel stood rigid on the porch as Sheriff Carter and Deputy Owens approached. Behind them, a crew carried ground-penetrating equipment, heavier than the handheld scanner. This is procedure, Carter said flatly. You'll want to stay back. Daniel's fists clenched. This is my house. Owens met his eyes for a moment. There was pity there, or maybe apology. Sometimes, houses don't stay yours. They set up in the living room, machines humming low. Anna stayed pressed against her father's side, her sketchbook clutched tight. The equipment beeped and churned, cables snaking across the floor. Then came the sound, not from the machines, but from beneath. A groan, deep and resonant, as though something massive shifted far underground. Dust trickled from the ceiling. The operators froze. The screen flickered, then sharpened. Beneath the seam, beneath the floor, a chamber appeared. A square space, its boundaries lined with straight edges too deliberate to be natural. One of the men in suits muttered, "It's built." The operators adjusted the feed. Inside the chamber, faint outlines took shape. A table, iron rings set into the walls, shadows that looked like chains. Anna's breath hitched. Her pencil slipped, dragging a line across her page. Daniel's face drained of color. That's not a tunnel. Owens swallowed hard. No, sir, it's a room. Against Daniel's protests, they pried the panel fully open and cut through the rotten beams behind it. A narrow passage yawned into darkness, the smell rushing out to meet them sour, metallic, choking. Reporters surged closer, cameras flashing. One of the men in suits clipped a light to his vest and ducked inside. The beam pierced the gloom, catching on something that glimmered, a chain bolted to the wall, rusted but unmistakable. Another followed, sweeping the floor with his light. "Scratches?" he called back. "Names." Anna craned forward, heart pounding. She glimpsed it before Carter blocked her view. Letters gouged into wood, layered over one another. Names, initials, some so faint they blurred together. She thought of the shoe, the carved MG. Her chest tightened. Daniel shoved past the sheriff, nearly stumbling into the passage. "Who did this? Who built this?" His voice cracked, raw. Carter caught his arm. "Back up." But Daniel wouldn't move. His eyes burned as he stared into the chamber. This wasn't supposed to be under my house. Silence answered him, heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of reporters outside shouting questions. Owens shifted uneasily. His voice was low, meant only for Daniel. "Ask who signed the first deed here. That's all you need." Daniel turned sharply, but Owens said no more. He adjusted his belt, eyes on the ground. By evening, barricade tape stretched around the property. Neighbors pressed against it, straining for a glimpse. Reporters shouted questions. The men in suits loaded equipment into the van, refusing to answer. Inside, Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, head in his hands. His bandaged palm bled through again, dark spots staining the fabric. Anna sat close, her notebook open. She didn't draw this time, she only stared at the blank page. "Dad?" she whispered. He looked up, eyes red, voice hollow. This was never supposed to be found. Outside, the news van's satellite dishes rose like antennae, cameras flashing. But inside, in the hollow beneath the farmhouse, the names carved into the wood waited, silent witnesses to something long buried. By nightfall, the whole town was talking. News vans lined the gravel road, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky. Reporters in crisp shirts stood in the mud, practicing lines for cameras that blinked red. Neighbors crowded the fence, whispering in low tones that carried easily across the still summer air. The Mitchell farmhouse, once quiet and unnoticed, had become a stage. Daniel shut the curtains, but flashes still slipped through sudden bursts of white that painted the walls in stark shapes. He prowled the living room like a caged animal, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Anna sat curled on the sofa, sketchbook against her knees. She tried to draw, but every line blurred. The noise outside, the murmur of voices, the whir of generators, the occasional laugh pressed into her ears until it was unbearable. "Why are they here?" she whispered. "Because people feed on trouble," Daniel muttered. "They'd rather watch our walls than mind their own." The next morning, the circus grew louder. Reporters shouted questions when Daniel stepped onto the porch. "Is it true you found a chamber? Was your daughter the first to see it? Are you staying in the house tonight?" Daniel gripped the railing so tightly the wood creaked under his hands. "Leave us alone," he barked. His voice cracked with anger, carrying across the yard. The reporters shouted louder, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Anna shrank behind him. Her stomach knotted when she saw two boys from school in the crowd, pointing and laughing. One mimed a wall collapsing. The other cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Hey, Anna, hear it whispering to you?" Her face burned. She clutched her notebook tighter, hiding behind her father's back. Daniel caught sight of them, his face darkening. He started forward, but Sheriff Carter appeared, blocking his path. "Let it go," the sheriff said quietly. "Don't give them more to talk about." Daniel's breath came heavy, his fists trembling, but he let himself be pulled back inside. That afternoon the power cut out. First the lights flickered, then the house fell dark. The hum of refrigerators and fans died, leaving only the muffled chaos of the crowd outside. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Anna sat at the table, her eyes straining in the dim. She could still hear the reporters, their voices sharp, their questions endless. But in the blackout, something else pressed close the heavy quiet of the walls themselves, as if listening. Daniel sat across from her, the crowbar beside him. His face was shadowed, unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of wood as the old house settled around them. Then, from the dark came a single choked sound. Not the house, not the crowd. Daniel's breath caught, broke, and turned into a muffled sob. Anna's chest tightened. She had never heard her father cry before. The chair beneath him creaked as he forced himself still again, swallowing it down. Outside, the crowd's voices swelled, but inside the blackout, silence returned thick, absolute, as if the house itself had swallowed the sound. Then came the men who spoke in whispers. By dawn the next day, the news vans were gone. Not by choice, by order. Black sedans with tinted windows had rolled in overnight, and men in plain suits walked the road with clipboards and radios. They spoke little, but their presence was enough. Neighbors who had gathered daily now stayed inside, curtains drawn. The circus was over, replaced by silence. Daniel watched from the porch, arms crossed. "They don't want witnesses anymore," he muttered. Anna stood beside him, clutching her notebook. She whispered, "Does that mean it's worse?" He didn't answer. Inside, the house filled with strangers. They carried folders, cameras, even equipment. Anna didn't recognize sleek and quiet. Nothing like the clunky scanner the deputy had brought. They didn't shout or argue. They murmured to each other, their words clipped, efficient. One man approached Daniel, his expression polite but his eyes sharp. "We'll need you and your daughter to keep distance from that section of the house. For safety." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Safety from what?" The man smiled thinly. "Old structures can collapse. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Daniel repeated, voice heavy with disbelief. For 2 days, the suits worked in shifts. They entered the chamber, carried out boxes wrapped in canvas, and sealed them into the waiting sedans. Each time they emerged, the smell clung stronger, metallic and sour, curling through the house like smoke. Daniel tried to watch, tried to ask questions, but was pushed back at every turn. When he pressed too hard, one of the men leaned close enough for Anna to hear and murmured, "Truth won't matter if no one dares speak it." That night, Daniel paced the kitchen, muttering under his breath. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "They're not investigating. They're burying it." Anna sat at the table, her sketchbook open. She sketched the shoe again, then the initials, then the outline of a locket she thought she'd glimpsed in the chamber before Carter blocked her view. Her pencil moved quietly, each stroke a way to trap the truth before it vanished. Her father stopped pacing long enough to notice. His voice broke. "Stop drawing that." She looked up, eyes wide. "If I don't, no one will remember." He stared at her, then sank into a chair, his head in his hands. By the third night, the house felt stripped. The strangers were gone, the sedans empty, the chamber sealed again with fresh boards. The only evidence of their presence was the sour odor that refused to fade. The phone rang. Daniel lifted the receiver, pressing it to his ear. Static crackled first, then a voice flat, cold, without accent. "Stop writing." Daniel's grip tightened. "Who is this?" "Erase the drawings. Burn them if you have to. She won't be safe if you keep this up." The line clicked dead. Anna, standing in the doorway with her notebook hugged to her chest, whispered, "They know." Daniel stared at the silent receiver, his knuckles white, while Anna clutched her notebook tighter, her sketches suddenly feeling less like drawings and more like evidence. Every shadow now felt like a watcher. Every shadow now felt like a watcher. The men in suits had left, but their absence didn't bring peace. Instead, it left something worse. The feeling of being followed. A sedan idled at the corner, 2 nights in a row, headlights off. Footsteps clicked behind Daniel when he walked home from the mill, but whenever he turned, the street lay empty. Anna noticed too. At school, her locker was rifled through. Pages torn from her notebook vanished without a trace. She carried it everywhere now, tucked inside her jacket even when the late summer heat pressed down like a weight. Daniel told her not to draw anymore, but she couldn't stop. Each page felt like proof against the silence settling around them. Proof that something real, something terrible, had lived inside their walls. At home, the house shifted again. It began with small tremors, faint enough that Anna wondered if she imagined them. Frames rattled against the plaster. A glass on the counter shivered. Then one night, as they sat at the table eating in silence, the vibrations grew sharper, so precise they felt like teeth chattering inside the walls. Anna dropped her fork. "It's alive," she whispered. Daniel shoved back his chair, pacing the kitchen. His face was pale, sweat shining at his temples. "It's not alive. It's not anything." "Then what is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his palm against the wall, as if brute force could silence it. The tremor stopped, but the frames on the wall kept swinging, slow and deliberate, long after his hand pulled back. The phone rang again that night. Daniel lifted it, his voice harsh. "Leave us alone." Silence on the other end, then a click. Moments later, Anna's bedroom window rattled. She rushed to it, heart hammering, but saw nothing but the empty yard. No wind, no footsteps, just stillness that felt too heavy. Sleep became impossible. Daniel took to sitting awake, crowbar always within reach, his chair angled toward the seam. Sometimes Anna woke to hear him whispering to himself. Not prayers, warnings. Not again. Not again. One night she crept close enough to hear the rest. Stay any longer, and we'll be swallowed like the rest. The words chilled her more than any tremor. By the 4th day, the pressure showed in their faces. Daniel's eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse from too little sleep. Anna's hands shook whenever she sketched, lines jagged and dark. The town still whispered, though now in hushed tones, careful not to draw the sheriff's attention. Some said the house was cursed. Others said the Mitchells had made it up, craving attention. None dared come close. But Anna knew the truth. She saw it every time the wallpaper rippled faintly in her peripheral vision, every time the sour odor slipped through the cracks. And she felt it most of all in the weight of her father's silence. That night, as the tremors started again, Daniel gripped her shoulders hard, his eyes wild. "We have to choose," he said. "Stay and drown in their lies, or leave before the house takes us too. If this happened to you, what would you do?" And then the last secret broke free. And then the last secret broke free. It began not at the farmhouse, but downtown. A clerk at the county records office slipped a file into the wrong hands. Within hours, photocopies passed through diner booths and bar counters, carried on whispers sharper than knives. The deed to the Mitchell property was older than most houses in town. Too old, names appeared in the margins, written and rewritten as ownership shifted. Among them, again and again, one name returned. Carter, Sheriff Carter's father. That evening, a crowd gathered at the edge of the Mitchell yard, not reporters now, but townsfolk. Men with arms folded tight, Women with lips pressed thin, teenagers restless with nerves. Their faces held more than curiosity now. They carried suspicion. Daniel stood on the porch, Anna beside him. He didn't have to ask what they had heard. It was written in their eyes. One man called out, "That chamber didn't build itself." Another voice, sharper, "Your daddy signed off on it, Sheriff. You gonna tell us why?" All eyes turned to Carter, who stood near the tape line, hat pulled low. Daniel's voice carried across the crowd. "He told me to keep it shut. He knew what was here." A ripple of unease passed through the people. Mrs. Green stepped forward, her face pale. "I remember when your father walked these roads," she said quietly, her words aimed at Carter. "I remember when families left in the night and never came back." Murmurs swelled, pressing like a tide. The sheriff's deputy shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing the radio at his belt. Carter didn't move. Anna clutched her notebook, her heart pounding. She thought of the initials carved into the chamber, the shoe left behind, the names gouged into wood, all of it pointing not just to the house, but to those who had chosen silence for generations. "Say something," Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. The sheriff's face was unreadable. He looked at the crowd, then at the farmhouse, then back at the crowd again. His jaw tightened, but no words came. Silence stretched until it felt unbearable. The townsfolk shifted, restless, their whispers growing sharper, their suspicion heavier. The Mitchell farmhouse stood behind Daniel like a looming witness, its boarded seam barely hiding what it contained. And the sheriff, its keeper's son, stood mute before them. The crowd's eyes stayed fixed on him, their suspicion sharp as knives. Carter tipped his hat low but said nothing, his silence louder than any confession. But some walls never give up their silence. Weeks passed, and the Mitchell farmhouse stood empty. The tape was gone, the sedans gone, even the reporters had moved on to the next story. Only the boarded seam remained. Hidden behind fresh wallpaper the men in suits had left behind. But the odor lingered sour, metallic, faint yet inescapable. Daniel packed what he could into the back of an old pickup. Boxes of clothes, a few tools, Anna's notebook sealed into a trunk. He didn't speak much as he worked, his face drawn tight, as if each nail creak of the house still pressed on his ears. Anna walked the rooms one last time. Her fingers trailed along the walls, pausing at the seam where it had all begun. The wallpaper was smooth now, patched clean, but she knew what lay beneath. She could still feel the chill in her palm. She knelt in her bedroom and slid her sketchbook beneath the mattress. Not the one she carried now, but the first one, the one with the earliest drawings of the seam, the initials, the shoe. She left it there, hidden. "Why?" Daniel asked when he saw her hesitate. Her voice was small but steady. "So the house remembers me too." They moved 2 towns over, renting a plain house with straight walls and no history. Daniel worked long shifts again, but he rarely spoke of the farmhouse. Sometimes, though, Anna woke to hear him muttering in his sleep short bursts of warning, sometimes a name, sometimes just silence broken by his own ragged breath. Anna started at a new school. She carried a fresh notebook, filling it with drawings of trees, birds, and skies. But every so often, when her pencil slipped, she found herself tracing a line straight down the page, thin, sharp, like a seam. Back in their old town, whispers lingered. Neighbors told newcomers not to walk past the Mitchell place after dark. Some swore they still saw a light flicker in the upstairs window. Others claimed the sheriff never returned to that street, not even once. At the diner, someone always leaned across the counter to murmur, "They found things under there, you know, things they never explained." And always, someone else would shush them, eyes darting toward the door, afraid the wrong ears might be listening. The farmhouse stood still, empty. Windows clouded, shutters sagging, paint peeling faster than before. The field around it grew wild, weeds swallowing the porch steps. But on still nights, when the air was heavy and the road was quiet, a sour odor leaked across the gravel, drifting toward the neighbors' houses. Anna grew older. She sketched less, studied more, but the old notebook never left her side. She carried it tucked beneath her bed, bound with a ribbon, its pages worn from the press of her hands. Sometimes she opened it, just to see the shoe again, the carved initials, the chamber's jagged outline. Proof she hadn't imagined it. Proof her father hadn't either. Daniel never laughed the same way again. His jokes, once clumsy but warm, were gone, replaced by a quiet that hung over him like a second skin. Anna grew sharper, quicker with her eyes, carrying a knowledge no child should hold. The town, meanwhile, wrapped itself in silence. No one spoke of the chamber in public. No one asked why the records tied back to the sheriff's father. Whispers filled the gaps, but no truth was ever written down. And even now, on windless nights, the old Mitchell farmhouse breathes out a sour odor, as if the walls themselves remember every name carved inside.